Welcome to the Anti-Architect Podcast. I am your host, Christian Giordano. As president and owner of the design firm Mancini Duffy, I am driven by a quest for learning and radically changing the industry. With this podcast, I'm hoping to improve the industry that I'm so passionate about by taking a critical look at how architects work through a variety of voices and shared experiences. Hello, Anti-Architect Podcast listeners. I'm excited to have Samantha Josaphat-Medina, RA, as my guest here on the Anti-Architect Podcast. Samantha is a Brooklyn-based architect, interior designer, and founder of Studio 397. She founded her firm in 2017 after working for about 6 years at various corporate architecture firms in New York City. She holds a Bachelor of Architecture from Penn State University and has served as president of NOMA, the New York chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects. Her firm, Studio 397 Architecture, provides all types of design from residential to commercial and explores how to harmoniously blur the boundaries between architecture, interiors, product design, and fashion. They are licensed as well as LEED certified in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Tennessee, and are certified MWBE in New York and New York City. I was connected to Samantha through my amazing partner and CFO at my firm, the one and only Bola Williams Ali, and her She Builds Waves event series. You can hear more about her on episode 1 of this podcast. Samantha, I'm super excited to have you here and have this conversation. Thank you for agreeing to come in.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited about this conversation.
Awesome. So I left some things out of your intro on purpose because I wanted you to express them in your voice. So I looked up some statistics on the NCARB website, and there are about 120,000 registered architects in the United States as of 2020, and most in California, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Of that, 17% are female, so that's about 20,000 or so. Can you tell our audience why the firm you founded is named Studio 397?
Yeah, so the firm was named Studio 397 because after I got registered in the state of New York, I found out that I was the 397th licensed Black female architect in all of U.S. history. And so when I found that out, I was just like, wait, what? Like, I graduated with a high school class of like 350. So I was like, how is this a thing? And so I was like, you know what, let me mark this time in history so that we can monitor our growth even more as we continue to increase those numbers.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So this is not a trick question. I don't expect you to know the answer. If you do, I'll be impressed. But I looked it up. So do you know who the first African-American female architect was?
Yes. So from my understanding, it's Beverly Green.
I have Norma Merrick.
See, these things get mixed up. It's you might be right. I might be right. Who knows? So,
but the
I'm
whole
sure
thing,
there's people out there that will check us on that.
I'm sure. Yeah. So this was according to Google. So who knows? But that was in 1954, and so my point is that was 67 years ago.
Wow.
So in 67 years, you become the 397th, which is it speaks to a lot of different issues, obviously. And so I guess my question is, why was it important for you to be recognized in this manner?
Because for me, it was realizing that I'm also a pioneer in my time, because there's not 397 of us. At that time, it wasn't 397 of us. Some had passed on. I'm in New York City where there's lots of construction, and to know that I probably know a large amount of Black female architects in relationship to other architects throughout the US or throughout the world, knowing that number was still very small and that we still have to be pioneers within this time. It was kind of something that I was like, I need to tell this story whenever I'm meeting someone without having to always tell this story
right.
Every time I meet someone. And so for me, it's been very exciting because as people meet me or meet the firm, they learn about that narrative and then they understand they have a larger picture of like why you only see one of us in the office sometimes, or why you don't see any of us in the office, and how that is an issue. But what's been really beautiful is when I'm on project meetings and I hear people say Studio 397, it's like they know the story. And so it's like, this doesn't stay within, you know, the Black female circle bubble. Like, this story is getting out, and people are being a bit more aware of knowing the importance of, you know, diversifying our offices and increasing those numbers to reflect what our society looks like, what our society is becoming. And so I'm just happy that I can get that narrative out beyond our bubble. Yeah,
it's exciting. And I love that idea. I love the fact that you obviously named the firm that, and exactly what you said. It's this, you know, you're saying it without saying it, right? And it becomes just something that's known. And I think that's more, because in the end, you want to be known as an architect.
Exactly.
You know, and it doesn't matter what, you know, what race or
I'm so happy you said that, because that's also a thing where it's just like, I enjoy getting awards. I enjoy getting acknowledged for the work that we do, but I also want to be acknowledged not just as a Black architect, but as an architect, as a designer. And so, like I said, I don't really want to tell the story like flat out, but the story is there to be told. And and what we do and what we look like is a representation of that story. We don't have to say it loud.
Right on. So. I think that's great. And so in the same context, tell us a little bit about your previous work experience and kind of the various firms that you worked at and what your experience was working there.
Yeah, so I worked at a range of different firms, from companies that did more institutional work, from like transportation projects here in New York to recreational facilities in New York. That was at a smaller engineering firm called SRW Engineering, as well as Gannett Fleming. And then, you know, I moved on to Corgan, where they did like a lot of aviation work. And then I was at HLW, where we did a lot of corporate interior projects. And so I have a range of large scale projects. But then when I started my practice, everything was like really tiny scope. So it was just like, I had to like learn an entire new sector of architecture and understand like certain processes that I didn't have to learn when I was in these larger firms. And so that's been a big learning curve. But, you know, thankfully, we've moved on where we're not moved on, but we've been growing responsibly in a way that we're still working on these smaller residential projects, but we're getting, you know, work with these larger commercial projects now that kind of align more with my experience as well as my partner's experience.
Okay, got it. And so when you're at these other firms, what was your role there? So my role wasn't, in my mind, that important until my last job at, I wouldn't say that important. I mean, every role was important, but I was a junior at most of those firms. Right.
And there were times where I was working at some of these firms where I had, you know, 3-4 years of experience, but I was labeled the intern, and people with younger, less experience than me was telling me what to do and stuff like that. And so that was a very frustrating time where it's just like, when is my value going to be recognized apart within my team? And so that was an issue that I started seeing when I was going from firm to firm. And that was one of the reasons why I started 397, because I was like, no one's going to recognize my value unless I show people what my value is. And if I don't have the opportunity to show my value, then how will that ever be recognized? And so that was one reason why I started Studio 397. Or there were times like when I was working at HLW, I did have a major role on one of the projects I was working on, where I was the architect as well as the interior designer, but I still wasn't valued. And I brought it to, you know, the leadership's attention, and there was no result, you know, there wasn't a positive result coming from it. And so at that point, I was just like, look, I've gotten licensed. I learned a lot during that journey. Everybody doesn't know anything. Well, not everybody doesn't know everything, but most people don't know everything. And when I realized that, I realized I can go out on my own, and anything I don't know, I could go find the answer, because I realized I was very resourceful. And so having that confidence made me take that leap of faith to just go out on my own and figure it out. And I have no regrets at all.
I love it. So that what you said there is you realize, and it's funny that you realize this as life moves on, that well, maybe people don't really know everything that they're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a knowledge base,
Yeah.
and it's not taking away, any credit of anybody. But you're right. You realize as you go, like, oh, hold on, wait a minute. That person really doesn't know that.
The expert doesn't know that.
Yeah. So why couldn't I just do that?
Yeah. And at first I was a bit fearful with telling anyone I was doing it, because I was like, everyone's going to look at me and say, oh, she's so young. How is she doing this? But I'm not going to lie. Now I just I'm like, look, I'm doing it, and I'm still young, so it's working.
I agree. And you got to take risks to have any reward, right?
Yeah.
And
I
that's
realized
how
I'm a risk taker. Like, I've been taking risks since the day I graduated high school. And I think that's second nature to me too. And I felt like when I was at these other firms, like, I couldn't be my 100% self. I couldn't take those risks. I couldn't take those challenges to challenge myself to grow. And so, I put matters into my own hands and I made it happen.
Yeah, I read in an article that was published about you, you said the bureaucracy of the profession was making me lose my passion for architecture.
Oh, yeah.
So can you explain?
Yeah, I would work these crazy hours, and then I'll be on the train going home. And then I'll be like, okay, I'm going to sleep for 4 hours, and I got to get back up and do the same thing. And I was just like, what is this? And, Instagram started getting popular, and I would see everyone posting all these beautiful architecture pictures. And I was just like, I can't even enjoy architecture. I'm too busy to even enjoy what I do. Yeah. I'm too busy to enjoy the results of, all these fabulous architects and designers. And I just felt like that passion was slowly dwindling away. And I kind of think I was also going into depression at one point in time, where it's just like, nothing made me happy. I would stare at people on the train and say, wow, I wish I could smile like them. I have no idea what they're smiling about, but I wish I could smile like them. I was just so grumpy. And I was just like, this isn't me. Everyone usually loves talking with me and socializing with me. And I was just like, I don't want to lose myself because of the profession. So I was willing to walk away.
Yeah. I remember when I was working at, a corporate firm, and I was busy, right? And I was always working and working and working. And I tried to describe this to my wife at some point, but I was bored. It's a weird thing, that you could be so busy yet be bored. And I would have the same kind of feelings. I'd walk along and you'd see someone, whatever, even someone that had probably not a great job, and you'd be like, oh, I'm so jealous of that person. Or someone that could. One of the things I think about our profession that's tough is that it never ends, right?
Yeah.
You can always do more. You can always draw more. You can always think about something more. You can always specify another version. You can always, there's always more and more and more. And sometimes you do, if you're honest with yourself, you get jealous of, the guy cutting the lawn because at the end of the day, he puts it away.
It's wow, honestly, it might be a bit more fun to just give people coffee in the morning.
That's right. Because when your job's done, it's done.
It's done.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're not thinking about, oh, should I have given them a latte? Should I give them almond milk, oat milk? They've gotten what they gotten. I would say now it's the complete opposite. I have to tell myself to stop because I'm too anxious and excited about what I'm doing. That's great. And so it's just Samantha, remember, you still need a work-life balance. I know you're excited about this, but
So from a diversity perspective, what does the future look like for the architecture profession from your view?
I can't tell you I have the answer to that, but I realize that there has been some change, and I've seen it in just the hiring of more minorities within firms. And I'm hoping that action alone results in a way that, now people have more opportunities to show their skill set, and the results from that will, continue, whether that is hiring more people or advancing people within their careers for professional development and them not hitting a glass ceiling. That's my hopes. When we were recently looking to hire, there were certain people that I knew that didn't have a job. And every time I reached out to them, they were like, oh, I just started 2 months ago. I just started 8 months. And I'm like, wow, I'm so happy for you, but also really sad that you can't be a part of our team. And so I have been seeing that within people probably a year or two younger than me. I've been seeing a bit more opportunities. So I'm hoping that continues, because what I did notice on the other end was people from a diverse background that had more experience than me either was a hidden figure within their office, or they decided to leave the profession because it just didn't work out for them. And a lot of these people had families to take care of. It's just like, I can't be this starving artist for too long if I'm trying to make more out of my life. And so, or you would have people that will go off and, start their own practice, but those practices will remain small for like decades and decades. And so I'm hoping like the legacy of some of these minority firms, increases, as well as, the opportunities for the young professionals or the existing minority professionals in the in existing firms to increase. Yeah,
I agree. And there's an overall awareness now, which I think also helps. And we'll get into kind of the education system behind it, because I think that's ultimately key. So
one thing I would add to that is I just hope it's not a performance and it's more of like a genuine care to increase diversity. One of my concerns from last year's, big turnaround within the industry and all over in other industries, I felt like it was a performance. And for me, I was just like, I do this every day, so I don't have to put on my tap shoes and perform. I understand that people want to change. I just hope that change, is long lasting and it's not just within the moment.
That's a very smart observation. And I will say, from a firm like ours that is very diverse, it's one of those things where I wanted to say like, hey, look at us. We've been like this forever. Yeah. What's the problem here? Why has it taken everyone so long to recognize this? But then again, in speaking to others here, at least it's something. It's a start, right? Yeah. And yes, the let's call it the height of it may fall off, but I think there's going to be some residual value.
Yeah, and understanding the diversity in everyone's intent and roles, because like not every Black architect wants to do the same thing, and so understanding what everyone's intentions are and how they can play a role in the overall ecosystem of this increase in diversity, because we all can't do the same thing. We all have to play our specific roles.
Right, absolutely. So if you had to pick one thing that annoys you about other architects, what would that be?
That they stay within their bubble.
Okay.
I feel like sometimes as architects, we live within this architecture world. And I think it stifles us in regards to our values, how we're valued outside, because, we'll have all these beautiful conversations and lectures about architecture and, what our fees should be and all of this stuff, but it happens within just our bubble. And then us trying to, articulate that value to clients sometimes is the hardest things, because they are not as exposed to what our process looks like. They're not as exposed to, the nitty gritty things. And so if we can find a way to like get a bit more out there outside of the architecture realm.
I like that. That's so one of my philosophies, and people have heard me say this here, is be the only architect in the room.
I love it.
And it always annoys me that we all do just stick together, and nothing against the AIA and nothing against these, and we participate in all of that, but it's all just standing around a bunch of other architects. Yeah. And how is that helping, kind of get the word out of
exactly.
what we do?
I think one of the successful business approaches I took that kind of aids in our growth is kind of venturing out into other industries and getting our story out there and getting what we do out there in different areas outside of our typical architectural realm, because, I started to get more publicity about certain things, and, one person would read one article and then they would want to read another, write another article. And, I got traction from a lot of people outside of the industry, and then the industry started looking at me. So, and you become a better architect if you expose yourself to more.
Absolutely. Well, in the intro I read, I know you want to blur the lines between, architecture interiors, but then you also have fashion in there. So what does that mean to you?
So I was working with Brooklyn design. Well, she's in Brooklyn now. She was in the city at the time, Studio 189, and she's a fashion designer where her manufacturing company is out of Ghana. And I helped her, put together or come up with the creative direction of what the set would look like. And I would provide her with renderings of saying okay, these are the pieces of clothing that you're going to be displaying. This is the theme that you want. Let's, do this, that, and the other. And so not necessarily making fashion, although I always say like, I wish I could make my own fashion because I never see anything that I exactly like. But, lending our architectural skill set to that industry in that particular way.
Sure. So our audience would love to get to know you better. So you and I have, from what I've read, the genesis of our interest in architecture is similar. And as I've told on some other podcasts, I think my interest comes from my mother, and she loves still to this day, trust me, looking at, going house hunting, looking at yes. houses. If there is a new neighborhood, it doesn't matter where it is. It could be a multi-million-dollar neighborhood down to a, $100,000
yep.
neighborhood. I mean, she loves going in and looking at model homes and
yep.
or going to open houses, whatever that might be. And I think that's what inspired me to look at a lot of architecture in that way. And I still, honestly, I love that stuff. If there's a model home, I
kind of do it in a creepy way these days, where I'm like, they're doing construction in that house, and I think the door is open. Let me just walk in
yep.
and see what's going on.
Oh, we used to sneak into houses at night that were under construction.
I checked the prices for the house, and I'm like, is it really at a good value? Like, I'm like doing like this whole like investigation of like these new homes, whether it's in Brooklyn or it's back in Georgia where my mom lives, Now, like, I go a little bit deeper, though. I don't wait till the house is finished. If it's under construction, I'll look still.
You want to go in there. So is that how your interest was?
Yeah. So we had moved from New York to Georgia when I was in middle school. And out of my two sisters, it's three of us. And I was the only one that would go with my mom house hunting. And I was just never impressed with what I would see. I'm like, why would you do this? Why would you do that? And so I remember going to a high school teacher saying, I'm going to be a builder. And she was like, what? And I was like, yeah, I'm going to build houses that make sense. And she was like, do you want to build houses or do you want to design houses? I was like, I want to design houses, aka a builder. And she was like, actually, that's not what builders do. That's an architect. And so she kind of exposed me to the world of architecture because her husband was an architect and she taught drafting class at the high school.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Yeah. So, where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about.
So I was born and raised part in Poughkeepsie, New York. And then when I started middle school, I moved to Marietta, Georgia. And so I finished middle school and high school in Georgia. And then I moved back up here and went to Penn State for college. And then I moved in with family in Queens because I didn't want to go back down south. I was like, all this construction is happening here. Why would I leave this area?
I totally agree. And what did your parents do?
So my mom was a licensed practitioner nurse at the time. She's now she's one step above a registered nurse.
Okay.
She's going to kill me because I didn't remember the acronym, and she's always like correcting me just like I correct everyone else. And my dad, he worked in hospitals as a supervisor for environmental health. So basically like he would manage a lot of the janitors that would, operate throughout the hospital. So as I'm saying that out loud, I'm like, oh, operations, maintenance. I'm like, oh, there is some type of connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
But my grandfather, he was a construction worker in Poughkeepsie, New York. And so we have like the strongest bond because like most people in my family go the medical route, and I was the one to like be the rebel and say, I'm not dealing with blood or any of those crazy things. I'm focused on building. And so we kind of created a stronger bond when I was in college because I would come home and like try to like build things, and he would tell me like, oh, you can't just use nails, you have to use nails and glue and this, that, and the other. And so like now, like when he would come and visit us, we would take him on project sites. And it's kind of awesome because he was a construction worker and probably looked at the architects like, whoa, these people that I could never probably sit in a room with, and to know his granddaughter is an architect and she's walking these sites, making some of these calls, like is like a proud moment for him. And so he like tells everyone about us.
That's great. So no interest in going into the medical field?
Nope, not at all.
Wow. Was your mom involved as COVID has happened? Was she? So
she was doing traveling nursing, and so she wasn't on the front lines dealing with COVID in particular, but she was still going from house to house, checking everyone's vitals because she basically checks her members are Medicare patients. And
Okay.
so she has to like check their vitals every so often. And so that was still scary because I would say you're going into all these different houses and, you know, eventually coming back home to my grandparents. And so that was kind of like a scary time and, you know, making sure that she has all the protection she needs.
So going back to your education at Penn State, I guess a question about kind of going also back to the diversity side. I went to the University of Miami in Florida.
Nice.
And when I think back as I was kind of researching you and thinking about kind of, well, what's my experience in college? I actually had I think of the University of Miami as an extremely diverse school.
I would believe that. It's Miami.
I
hope it is.
As diverse as New York City is, right? I feel like in Miami, because it's such an international city and it's so in your face.
Yeah.
Like I went to school with kids from all the Caribbean countries, South America, Africa. I mean, they all kind of came there. So it was a very diverse experience. So tell me a little bit about your experience going to Penn State.
So at Penn State, in my first year, there may have been 3 Black students, me included, and one Black student dropped off. And I don't know if that was just a vision or that person actually existed, but that person dropped off in first year, and it was just me and one other girl. And we made it all the way through 5th year, and her grandfather passed in our first semester of 5th year, and her professor failed her. And so I ended up being the only one graduating in my class from our BARC degree as like the Black student. And so those numbers were very little. We had 2 Latina students and 1 Indian student, and that was our core diversity team right there.
So how was your education overall at Penn State?
Penn State's education was good, but it was hard for me because I wasn't just learning architecture. I was just learning life. Like, I was learning all these different cultures and these different ways of living. Like, I remember, you know, one of my best friend now, she'd say like, oh, I'm going to our vacation home in Jersey. And I'm like, vacation home? What? Like, people do this? And like, you vacation every summer? What? My mom always told me, go read a book. And so just learning different lifestyles and, but overall, I think the Penn State education was really good in terms of technology and theory. Okay. You know, it was very heavy on theory, but it was very heavy on technology. And so I think both were really hard for me because I felt like with the theory-based thing, it was like art is subjective, you know, depending on like how your professor receives your project is the grade that you would get. And so for me, I was just always trying. And then with the buildings technology portion, I mean, everything was just foreign to me. So it was just a matter of just putting in the time and getting to know all of that that stuff. But I realized by the time I got to 4th year in architecture, I realized I had to actually tap into my personal experiences in order to get to the end of my project. Because I felt like I was trying to like do what everyone else was doing or do what I thought was right. And it never really made sense to me. And I would have these panic attacks and I'd be like, okay, channel your inner Samantha from like when you used to double dutch or braid hair. And when I would do that, I would actually come up with a beautiful idea for my projects. And so I realized later in my studies that I had to like pay attention to who I was in order to like see myself through the process.
That's fascinating. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. School's it's a weird time because I agree. The education system in architecture, it's amazing because it's so, you touch on so many different things, right? From the very technical to the very theoretical, right? But I always feel like now if I had to go back to school now, 25 years later, I could crush school. Like I know exactly what those professors want to hear.
If I sit in a room with my classmates right now, I would be talking so much. I'd be like, oh my gosh, Samantha, who would just be so quiet staring at everyone. But one thing I would say in terms of the education that I wish I would have gotten was the art history being a bit more diverse. Because I only felt like I learned about European architecture.
Interesting.
And like now that, you know, I do my own research or like learn about like Mexican architects and other architects in South America and what people are doing all across Africa. And so I'm just like, wow, this stuff is really beautiful. And I just didn't know it existed, you know?
Well, at we learned a lot about Spanish architecture and architects and stuff like that. So I almost missed a lot of that other, the more traditional things.
Yeah.
So it all is dependent on
you know, if I'm going to visit, like I went to Haiti and I saw like some beautiful architecture and I was like, damn, like I felt like school made me think that like where I came from didn't have the architecture that could stand up to, you know, architects, you know, within Europe and stuff. And like, so like if I had that while I was in school, I think that would have given me a bit more confidence too, feeling like, you know, I have something to bring to the table, or at least my ancestors have something to bring to the table.
Right.
And so like, I think increasing that within schools that have that lack of, you know, history from a diverse perspective can actually help the confidence of the students in the program.
Sure, I agree. So kind of going back to the educational system, right? When I look up the statistics for African American engineers and other professions, right, it's a lot higher. So I found like engineers, African Americans, about 10%, but the numbers are like a lot, like it's hundreds of thousands, right, that are still that, right? And it's hard to parse out exactly what type of engineers, but
because you have so many different fields.
A rocket ship engineer to a car engineer to a mechanical engineer, which is really more of what I was trying to find the numbers on. But to me, interest in architecture starts at a really early age. How do we get more African Americans to be exposed to that in like really, I'm talking early age, like the Lego years?
So one is the exposure through these programs like Project Pipeline that NOMA does, or ACE mentoring, and they're good. But again, like our profession is so small, like getting that outreach is hard. But I feel like we've been doing a better job at exposing minority students, but what we've been failing at is providing the resources that they need. And if there's still a lack of resources, those numbers drop off like crazy. And so I feel like having the resources, whether that's in high school or in college or even after graduation, whether that is financial resource or if that's like a mentorship resource or, you know, some type of resource to get these people in the programs that can really support them to become an architect and not like start the process and fall off. One organization that I know very well is NSBE, and they had that's the National Society of Black Engineers, and they had a very strong chapter at Penn State. And one thing that I really admired about them was they always found an internship for each one of their members, you know, as a student, and just being able to provide them with those opportunities gave them the opportunity to say, well, look at my resume, I have experience, or, you know, I've worked in this sector. And one issue that I find a lot, you know, within our profession is if we're stifled with opportunities at the beginning, it's hard to get that opportunity that equals our level of experience. And so, you know, if it takes someone 3 years to find a job, they're already 3 years behind, and, you know, but their lifestyle isn't 3 years behind. And so it's always been a setback. And so just for me, like my biggest answer to a lot of these like big questions are opportunity, like providing opportunities and that financial resource. Because like I remember when I was even looking for a job, you know, somebody was like, hey, I might have a job for you in Oakland, California. I was like, I can't even buy a plane ticket to get to Oakland. So now I'm out of that opportunity. And so it's just like things like that. Yeah, absolutely. But you know, even ACE is high school already, right? You've already gotten to high school, so people have probably dropped off. And we've talked about this in our office, and we've actually started some initiatives of how to get middle schoolers involved in architecture. Project Pipeline deals with the middle schoolers for that exact reason, exposing them early so that they can get into a high school program if they have that interest, or start talking to people. Because I feel like middle school is when you start feeling as though like you're an adult, when in reality you're far from it. you definitely are not. But I have a middle schooler, trust me. She thinks she's an adult. Yes, exactly. So in your opinion, what do architects do well and what do they do wrong? Like what's wrong or what's broken with the process? I feel like that answer is one answer. We detail very well, but we detail too much sometimes. we pay attention to details, I feel like, for a longer period of time than we need to, and that hinders us from a business perspective. And it's weird because now I'm always thinking from a business mindset than just a design aspect. But I do realize like it's our role to monitor the client with their expectations and what can be done within the time frame that they want it to be done. Because a lot of times we have clients say, this is my budget, this is what I want, and I need it done at this particular time. And we're like, okay, we receive all of this information and we start working towards those goals. But then the client comes in with 3 or 4 different iterations and we're like, hey, remember you said you wanted to be completed by then? Or, hey, you remember you said your budget was this. What your suggestion doesn't align with your budget. And so I feel like as architects, what we do bad is we say, okay a lot, and it hinders us. But what we really do well is we really make it work. Like we do so many iterations that it almost becomes perfect. Right. And so it's like we're perfectionists, but it's like to our detriment.
I bet your grandfather would agree that we probably draw too much, and because the contractor always comes at it from a very different point of view.
They're like, this is the answer, let's get it done. And I'm like, wait, let's think about this. Like, how does this feel? And and they're like, who cares how it's feel? Like, we got to get it done in two weeks. And it's just like, oh.
Do you think the actual business model for architects needs to change?
Yes. I do think the actual business model for architects need to change. And I think it goes back to what I was saying about exposing ourselves outside of the industry so that people understand the breadth in which we operate. One thing that we've learned, just within the few years we've been operating is how we divide up architecture versus interior design and when we do it. Dealing with the DOB is a process of its own. And so now we focus on the basics of getting the architecture figured out. And so while the review process is happening at the DOB, that's when we're doing the interior design instead of trying to do everything at the beginning and then hand it over, because we realize time wise it just extends the project schedule a lot. And a lot of times when you're doing single family residential, people have these deadlines that are tied to their personal lives. And so we try to address that. But we have so many clients who are pregnant and we're just like, okay, this might not be ready when you're ready to deliver. So have your home in order, have your second home in order so that, you're not screaming at us as you got your baby in your hand.
So tell me or tell us a little bit about more about your firm, the people, the size, the project types, things like that.
Yeah, so we're still very small, but we are growing responsibly. And that's one thing that I'm trying to manage with my partner, who is my husband, Luis. I've seen a lot of firms fluctuate, and I know that might happen, but I really don't want it to happen. Not yet, because I feel like people's personal goals are in my hands in a way, because, if we're giving them a paycheck every 2 weeks and I cut that from them, it's like someone's goals are denied. And so I don't want to be a part of that formula. And so right now there's a core 4 of us, our 4th employee started yesterday as we were celebrating 4 years. And so there's 4 of us. It's me, who is an architect, my husband, who is also a part owner. His background is in construction management and finance. And so I pulled him over from the dark side over to architecture. And that has been a very good, valuable resource for us because it makes our team very dynamic. And, we are approaching things from a lens of the contractor, because he's just you need to figure this out. This is your role, Samantha, or they're going to figure it out. And it's not going to be that beautiful design that you are. He knows I'm very anal when it comes to certain things. So he's just figure it out, or someone else is going to figure it out and you're not going to like it. And so he works with me on details a lot because, I said, I am a young architect. And so I don't know everything, but being able to pull on his construction management experience has been extremely helpful for one of our projects we're doing in Pennsylvania, which is a complete remodel of a single family detached home where, we're doing wood framing. And I'm I don't know anything about wood framing. We've been in New York, and although his experience is in concrete, he understands certain details. And so we were able to work through a lot of those things as far as the curtain wall and the roofing details and stuff like that. And then Charisse is I don't know if she's our 1st or 3rd employee. People tell me I'm our 1st employee, but I see her as our 1st employee. Her background was in millwork, and it's one of those stories that I tell, the reason why it's important to give opportunities to young professionals early on in their careers, because they can be set back. And I saw her on that road of being set back. She ended up getting an opportunity with a mill worker because she couldn't get a job opportunity in an architecture firm. And she was working with a mill worker for 3 to 4 years. And I was trying to help her find a job, and she wasn't getting an opportunity. And when we were able to hire, she was our first employee because she was spearheading our project pipeline for our NOMA chapter. And she was phenomenal, and her work ethic was amazing. And I just knew, like, if we brought her on board, I wouldn't have to worry about someone like not holding their weight. And she has been like hitting it out of the park since we brought her on. And so her experience is millwork heavy, but I've been, showing her the ropes of interior design and architecture, and she's been doing a great job. And then our fourth employee we brought on, she was actually my TA when I was teaching at City College. Again, saw her work ethic, and I always kept that in mind. And so when we were ready to we just won a really large project, and we realized we had to staff up. And so I reached out to her and said, like, hey, I was like, do you know Revit? I DM'd her. She was just like, wow, I got a job through a DM. I DM'd her and was like, hey, do you know Revit? And then she started answering questions. I was like, so we're looking to hire. Would you be interested? And then she was just like, wait, what? I thought you were just having a regular conversation with me. And so, doing things a bit different, but having that diversity within like our team has been extremely great. And so we're continuing to try to have that diversity within our own office. One of my mentors, Richard Franklin, had told me, remember, Samantha, you're a small firm, so you can't afford to train everyone. You have to have people that have an experience that would add to the project. Yeah. And so we had to be mindful of who we're hiring, as a small firm.
And let them go and do their thing and trust in them. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that has been a learning lesson too, like letting go and trusting him, transitioning between like still being that production arm. You'll
struggle with that for the rest of your life. So.
Yeah. And so, that's literally my struggle as of right now.
How did you start the firm? Did you take on money from anyone? Did you invest your own? How did you
when I realized I was ready to go off on my own, I was like, so I don't really have a savings to pull from, because people would say, oh, you just run out of your savings. And I was like, that would be good if I had a savings to run out of. And so what I did was I was resourceful, and I reached out to a lot of small architecture firms who I knew the owners pretty well and said, hey, I can consult with you doing construction documents. And so for like the first year, I was just consulting with architecture firms, providing them with construction document services. And then, I got one small project because it was too small for another architecture office. And so they passed it on to me, and I slowly just started building my clientele from there.
Okay. And how do you go about getting your clients?
So it's weird. Like, I've been trying to go after clients, but they've been coming. And so I haven't been going after. Yeah, it's crazy. Like, just in February, we're like, okay, we have to start like going after clients. And then we got another project, and then it just snowballed. And so it's like, we haven't really went after clients I'll take that back. I think a lot of the stuff that we're getting now is through networking that I did in the past. So for example, one of our large commercial projects we're finishing up now, it was a construction site near where I lived. I saw a big hole in the ground, and I was just like, oh, what's going on? Did my investigation on Google, and I reached out to the development firm and said, hey, I'm an architect in Brooklyn. I see that you guys are working on stuff. I'd love to collaborate with you guys in the future. And so I did a small zoning analysis for them in Harlem. But then when they were looking for interior designers for that project that I saw, they reached out to us to answer to the RFP, and we did, and we won the project. And so a lot of those, like a lot of my projects that we're getting now have been like from past connections that I made like long time ago, not while I was like, seeking for it like at that moment. Yeah. Like our Pennsylvania project, the owner found me on the Penn State website. And so like all these random connections.
That's great. But playing the long game is the best way to do it, right?
So
Starting
I have
that
learned,
relationship, getting in, and you never know where people are going to end up and call you.
Exactly. So I tell people now, like the network that you're building now may not be for the now, but for the future. So just like be mindful, like you got to keep going. Like you're not going to see that result right away.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. You've got to play that. And so how has COVID affected your business?
So in terms of COVID in our business, I was already working from home. And at the time it was just me. And then it's weird, like we've been growing through COVID. Good. And I think one was because we won that project, that commercial project early on in COVID. And that's when I had brought my husband on, and I was just like, okay, like, let's do this. Because the plan was, it's funny because I was at Bola's event in January of 2020. And I said, the goal is for my husband, well, my fiance at the time, to come on board at the end of 2020. But I got the RFP in February. We found out we won it, I think officially in May. And so he joined in May. And so that was still COVID.
Right.
And so we doubled in size. And then we got really busy with other work because of like a lot of the racial uproar that was happening and a lot of people wanting to do more work with minority designers. And so we had an increase in business then. And so our firm continued to grow. In terms of COVID, what was hard for us was just like visiting showrooms and vendors and continuing that networking in person, because it is different than doing a Zoom call, and I got so tired of Zoom calls. And so I would say like that was our hiccup during COVID, was like the networking that we were ready to do as we were growing.
Right. But that's good news. And now as you come out of COVID, you'll be able to kind of continue.
Oh, I'm so ready. I'm so ready.
So what opportunities do you see for technology in our profession? So
I think technology could be a really great way to connect us to the outside world, I think, because I feel like technology is taking over such large aspects of our lives. We have no choice but to integrate it within our work. And so being a bit more forward thinking of like what's out there and how we could prep our spaces to receive new technology in the future. So not just designing for the technology that exists, but how do we prep our spaces for future technology. And that's kind of hard because literally devices change in size and, connections. But if there's a way that maybe we have that technology expert within our industry or within our firms, if our firms could allow it, to understand like what are the basics of technology and how, we can modify our architecture as technology changes.
Sure. Wow. So kind of bringing it all back around, and you're still young. So if you had to do it differently as far as your career is concerned, what might you have changed?
The only thing I would do differently is find more money to pay for school. I wouldn't change any other thing, because I'm really happy where I got to, and I don't think I would have gotten to where I am unless I went through all the crap that I went through. Not that I would tell anybody else to go through it, but for my particular journey, I've accepted it for what it is. It's just the student loans that are like a bane of my existence. Even though the goal is by the time I turn 33 in September, they will be wiped away.
Wow, congrats. That's amazing. That's
thank
great.
you.
That's great. So Samantha, thank you so much for being my guest here. I really appreciate it. This was an awesome conversation. And thanks so much for taking the time.
I'm always happy with talking with other architects and not always just talking about architecture, just talking about life,
Exactly.
So thank you so much for having me.
You're an amazing guest. So, there's obviously a lot more that I'm sure we can uncover. Thank you for being an important voice as well in our profession. And you've only just begun. So I want to give you some plugs. To see and read more about Samantha and her firm Studio 397, you can find her on her website, obviously, which is studio397architecture.com. And is there anything else that you want to plug in terms of your
We are also on Instagram at Studio 397.
Awesome.
I keep it pretty simple because we need to operate very lean.
I appreciate that. Trust me.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much.